So, good day, everyone. Welcome to our speech and theater arts discussion. So, for this afternoon, what we'll be tackling about is the different elements of drama. So, last meeting we discussed about the history of theater and the theater in the different countries such as the India, China, and Japan. Okay, so I'll be sharing you my screen. Okay. So for today, we will be discussing the different definition of the different elements of drama, identify the elements of drama from sample literary works, and analyze sample literary works using the elements of drama. So let's define first what is a drama. So it's only just a review. A drama is a form of storytelling in which actors make the characters come alive through speech, which is referring to the dialogue, and action, which is referring to the stage direction. So every performance of a play is different, even if the same actors perform the same play many times. So the reason why we say that that there's a different performance of a play from one to another, it's because every actors or every theater production have their own way of attacking a certain theater play. So they do have their different ways of interpreting a particular play. So we cannot say that this particular play may be similar on the way this other play will be performed. So they have their different ways, they have their different interpretations. So um, despite that, the content is still there. What is more important is they did not sacrifice the content of the story because with that they are violating the rights of the author. Okay, so there are two types of drama. We have tragedy and we have comedy. So I've already mentioned that when we talk of tragedy, so that is the kind of a drama wherein the main character experience pitfall. When we talk of pitfall, ito yung usually namamatay yung main characters doon sa kwento. Despite na namatay yung main character in the story, he or she is still considered as a hero because um, these character do have their own purpose. Despite that na namatay sila doon sa kwento, they are still able to accomplish their purpose. Okay? So that is one of the characteristic of tragedy. Namatay man si hero sa kwento, na-attain naman niya yung kanyang purpose. Okay? And then we have comedy. So it's far from the comedy that we know na generally nakakatawa. So when we talk of comedy, it means that there is a happy ending in the story. It means that the main character did not die, and the main character was able to fulfill his or her goals in the story. In 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 Shakespearean time, there is the so-called tragicomedy. Tragicomedy. So when we talk of tragicomedy, it is a combination of tragedy and comedy. So how it happens? It is common among the plots used by Shakespeare in his play, one of which is Romeo and Juliet. So we notice that in Romeo and Juliet, the main characters died. So Romeo and Juliet died in the story. That's tragic. That is on the tragic part of the story. However, they died. Although they died, they still live happily ever after in the other life, although it's not mentioned in the story, but we assume that both of them live a happily ever after story in the other side of life or the other part of the world. But the thing there is that it is still considered as comedy because ginusto nila yung nangyari. Okay? So yung pagkamatay nilang dalawa, ginusto naman nila yon, and that what makes it a comedy. Namatay sila, pero yung gusto nila that they will uh, live forever for the rest of their other life, if that's how we're going to make use of the term, that's still the attainment of the goals of the characters. So that's what makes it a tragic comedy. And it's very common in the plots of Shakespeare. Just like in Othello, the Moor of Venice. Yan, ganyan din yung plot. So we call it the tragic comedy. Okay, so let's now move on the core of this discussion, which is the elements of drama. The elements of drama is common with other literary forms. It is also similar with short stories, even in novels. But there are some um, differences as we go on with our discussion. So, the elements of drama is composed of plot, characters, actors, setting, point of view, diction and language, tone and atmosphere, symbolism and allegory, and finally theme. So these are the eight elements that we have to take into account when we are dealing with the elements of drama. So let's have first the plot. Okay, so when we talk of plot, it refers to the structure of the story. So it refers to how the story the plots were weaved together to come up with a story. So, ano bang simula, gitna, at dulo. So, we are used to follow the three-part structure of a play na there is the beginning of the story, and then we have the middle of the story, wherein at the middle of the story, it's more of the conflict, and the third part of the story is more of the resolution. So, we call it the three-act structure that is very much prevalent and in most of the plays that we watch. So it's still part of the plot structure. Where does the plot structure derived come from or originated? So it follows a dramatic structure, which was an idea originating in Aristotle's Poetics that effective stories can be broken down into elements. So Poetics is it's actually a work of Aristotle na akala natin ay more of poetry ang content. Well, no, it's not. So yung poetics, hindi mga tula ang laman niya. Para siyang lecture book ni Aristotle na kung saan doon nakapaloob yung kanyang lectures about understanding poetry. So during the time, the known literary works that is considered as a literary work is poetry. And bakit ngayon naipasok itong drama, poetics nga, poetry nga? Because if we're just going to trace back the the history of poetry way back the Greek era or the Greek period, so all forms of literature at that time is presented in a form of poetry, even drama. So kaya nga tatlo yan. They have epic poetry, they have the dramatic poetry, and then they have lyrical. Of course, epic poetry, something epic or narrative poetry, ang best example natin dyan is Iliad and Odyssey, which is, although ang Iliad and Odyssey is presented in an oral tradition, ibig sabihin, pasalita siya, binibigkas, oral tradition, narrative poetry siya. Okay? And then we have lyrical poetry na kung saan inaawit. Okay, may salo ng musika yung tula. At yung pangatlo nga is dramatic poetry. So, ang paraan ng pagbigkas ng mga linya, ng mga dialogues ng mga actors was in a form of a poetic lines. So, kaya siya talaga tinawag na dramatic poetry. So, nakapaloob doon sa poetics ni Shakespeare yung kanyang analysis uh, of the different literary works, different dramas uh, written by Aeschylus. I think I've already mentioned this background, but I'm just reiterating this to you so that uh, you will be able to recall those things that I mentioned. So okay, so going back, in Aristotle Poetics, he said that effective stories can be broken down into elements. So these elements are further subdivided into exposition, complication, crisis, or climax. Then we have the anticlimax, where an anticlimax is yung falling action Okay, yung tinatawag ng falling action, yung katumbas sa falling action. And then we have resolution. Okay, so this is the Aristotelian tragedy plot. So the first one is the initiating action, wherein in the initiating action, major problem, conflict, major characters, and setting of the story are introduced. So, and in the rising action, the problem becomes complicated or becomes more than one related problem. So, meaning to say there's a tendency or there's a possibility that a problem may result to another problem, making it more complicated. Okay, then we have the climax. So this is the last complicated action before the falling action. Kumbaga, in Tagalog, we call it the yung sukdulan. So that is where the action will be more heightened. So, nandito yung mabibigat na mga eksena doon sa isang play or sa isang drama. And then, of course, since it follows a three-part structure, there is a need for them uh, to subside from the conflict. So we call it the falling action. So the falling action now is the transition um, from climax to resolution. So this contains scenes that are reflecting solutions to the problem. Kaya nga sabi rito, it happens very fast, problems being solved one by one. So those problems na na-implant mo doon sa rising action that contributed on heightening the scene. So it will now be solved now in falling action. And finally, resolution. What is the outcome of the falling action? So it's the end of the tragedy. So of course, the end of the tragedy is mamamatay nga si main characters. It ends by a catastrophe like death or fall of the tragic hero. So mention natin yung tragic hero. Kaysa ang tawag kasi doon sa main character, sa main character ng isang dramatic poetry or dramatic ng isang drama during Aristotelian time was tragic hero. Okay? So may kanya-kanyang may sariling characteristics ang isang tragic hero. I think that will be discussed as we go through with our lecture, or I think ma-mention ka rin siya sa inyong literary criticism subject. Okay, so let's um, dissect now Shakespearean's tragic plot. Okay, so nung kanina, Aristotelian, ngayon naman tingnan natin kung paano ba hinati-hati ni Shakespeare yung kanyang mga plot. So we call it the Shakespearean tragic plot. Okay, so Act 1 contains the exposition. So this is where the setting, characters, and conflicts are introduced. So pareho lang na katulad din lang siya yung kay Aristotle. And then Act 2 contains the rising action or the inciting incident. Okay, so it is now introducing to us the problem. So similar din siya doon kay Aristotle. Then Act 3, the turning point. This is where the reversal of fortune occurs and it all starts to go badly for the tragic hero. So nandito na yung pinakang problema. The problem will be more heightened. So the Act 4, the following action, is the downhill spiral, the moment of final suspense. And then finally, the catastrophe or the resolution, the conflicts are solved. And for Shakespeare, it is usually death. Chaos returns to order. Despite the death of the main character, chaos returns to order. So bumalik na lahat ng mga sitwasyon sa original situation before the conflict arises. And that's how Shakespeare plot his stories in his dramas. So unlike doon sa Aristotelian, mas clear na pinakita sa atin ni Shakespeare na kung saan niya linalagay yung bawat acts. So from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there are 5 acts usually in Shakespearean tragic plot. Okay? And then this is a very common representation of story. It is not only applied in drama itself, but also in most of uh, stories, most of um, prose prose literature, just like short story and novels. Okay, so kilala si Freytag. Okay, so ano bang nalaman nito kay Freytag? So it composed of exposition, complication, climax, reversal, and denouement. Okay, so Freytag was developed by Gustav Freytag in the 19th century, and this structure has become so ubiquitous, and many of the writers have used it to write their own stories, even if they don't know it. It was called Freytag's Pyramid. So, ibig sabihin talaga, marami na ang gumagamit ng ganitong plot structure. However, they're not well aware that it was Freytag's. Even me, when I was using this structure, I don't know that it is called Freytag. Okay? So, here are the definition of the five elements of Freytag's pyramid. So, ito yung pangatlong plot structure. So, introduction. So, the introduction is composed of two parts. The introduction should contain both the exposition and exciting force. So, what then is the content of exposition? So this is a set of scenes in which no major changes occur, and the point is to introduce the principal characters, the time period and tone, and set the exciting force. Okay, so then exciting force, Freytag also calls this the complication, and other frameworks call it the inciting incident. So when some force or will on the part of the protagonist or an outside complication forces the protagonist into motion. So kumbaga, it is a planted scene in the story wherein it triggers the problem. So that is exciting force. So nagka-plant ka ng isang scene in the story that will trigger a problem. And now that the problem is there, pupunta tayo ngayon sa rising movement. It is now that the chief action has been started, this continues the movement toward the climax. So dito sa rising movement, dyan na ngayon nagbe-build up yung um, main problem in the story. Okay? This continues the movement toward the climax. Any characters who have not as of yet been introduced should be introduced here. Okay? So, para hindi biglaan yung pagpasok ng mga characters in other parts of the story. Many people call this the rising action, but Freytag calls it rising movement. Okay? Di ba we are all particular na ang tawag natin nga rito ay rising action. Okay? But if we are referring to Freytag, then it is called um, the rising movement. Okay, then this is now the most heightened part of the story, wherein we call it the climax. So in Freytag's framework, the climax occurs in the middle of the story. In this framework, the climax can be thought of as a reflection point. If things have gone well for the protagonist at the climax, they start to fall apart tragically. In a comedy, if things have been going poorly for the protagonist, things start improving. So makita natin yung difference ng climax kapag ito ay tragic play at kapag ito ay comedy. So again, sa comedy, pinapakita rito kung papaano ba babagsak yung main characters. Okay? Kumbaga sa comedy naman, papakita kung papaano mai-improve yung ah, character, yung disposition, yung papaano malalampasan ng main character yung kanyang struggle. And then we have the following action. So things continue to either devolve for the protagonist or in the case of a comedy, improve leading up to the force of the final suspense, a moment before the catastrophe. So when the author projects the final catastrophe and prepares the audience for it, as Freytag says, it is well understood that the catastrophe must not come entirely as a surprise to the audience. So, dapat binibigyan din daw ng idea kung paano ba magko-connect yung falling action to the um, resolution of the story. And then finally, we have the catastrophe or the denouement. Bakit catastrophe tsaka denouement? Kasi nga naman, for tragedy, it usually ends with a catastrophe. Kasi nga namamatay yung main characters. Kaya talagang ginamit ni Freytag dito yung term na catastrophe to refer to tragedy. Hindi naman kasi pa pwedeng gamitin yung denouement or resolution kasi nga, after all, namatay yung main characters in the story. Okay, so for comedy, it is usually ends with a denouement. Okay, so um, while Freytag never used the word denouement in his framework, people interpreting him have used the term to describe endings with the happy result of the protagonist. Kaya tulad nung nabanggit ko sa inyo. So, hindi naman intention ni ni Freytag na uh, catastrophe na lahat ang ending ng isang story. Maybe because he is he is the the one that comes before him is si Shakespeare na kilala sa tragedy. So siguro kaya nagamit yung term of na catastrophe. But again, just like what we have mentioned here, others use the term to describe happy result of the protagonist. And then the second element is what we call the characters and actors. Okay, there are different set of different kinds of characters in a given drama, wherein there's a need for us to analyze or to understand the characters, for us um, to make them more realistic and to make them more appealing to the audience. Okay? So kasi minsan, nai-stereotype ang mga characters na palagi at palagi yun na lang yung kanilang characterization. So there's a need for us to also make use of a different flavor for our characters. Okay, so before the dialogue in a script, the playwright will often include a cast of characters. Typically, each character, both major and minor, is listed alongside a brief description of the character's roles in the story. Okay, so this is an example of a cast of characters from the play entitled Decomposition by Maureen Kaneberg. So here we have how many characters? We have Perry, Pepin, Helen, John, Kristen, and Anastasia. So we have five characters here, and as you can see, the cast of characters do have their description. They are called the characters description, so that those who will be reading the play will get an idea of ano ba ang gusto kong hanapin sa aking actors. Halimbawa, kapag mamimili na ako ng actors, is meron ng characters description, madali ko na ngayon makukuha kung sino yung gusto kong ilagay doon sa aking mga characters. Of course, on part of the reader, it will help them be guided on understanding um, the the play. So, yun lang yung ilan sa mga purposes kung bakit kailangan meron tayong characters description. Okay, so there are two main types of characters. I'm sure that you're all particular with these two main types of characters. So the first one, okay, so the first one is what we call the protagonist. Kumbaga, ito ang bida sa kwento. And then we have the antagonist, Tagalog, siya yung kontrabida sa ating kwento. Pero let's read the specific description of the protagonist and the antagonist. So, protagonist is the main character around which the story revolves. So, the decisions made by this character will be affected by a conflict from within. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng ang maging conflict ay magsisimula mismo doon sa kanyang sarili. Or externally, through another character, nature, technology, society, or the fates or God. So, ang pangit naman kasi ng isang kwento kapag lagi na lang pinapaboran yung main characters. So, kailangan ding bibigyan siya ng flaw. Kung tawagin ni Shakespearean, ay ni Aristotle yan ay tragic flaw. Ibig sabihin, bagaman ikaw yung bida doon sa kwento, ikaw yung main character doon sa kwento, the characters still have its flaw. Okay, and okay. The next is we have the antagonist. So this character or group of characters causes the conflict. So sila yung hahamon doon sa ating protagonist. However, the antagonist could be the protagonist who is torn by a problem within. Most times, something external is causing the problem. Okay? So there are different traits of characters. So those are the two kinds of characters. Now this time, you have different traits of characters. So first, we have foil. So a foil is a character that has opposite character traits from another. It means that it meant to help or highlight or bring out another's positive or negative side. Many times, the antagonist is the foil for the protagonist. So, para mas makilala pa natin yung, at para mas maipakita pa o ma, magkaroon pa ng spice yung isang character at mas makiunawaan pa natin yung kanyang characterization, naglalagay ngayon na tayo ng foil. So, siya ngayon yung hahamon doon sa character para makita yung pag-uugali ng isang protagonist. So, tawag natin dun ay foil. Then we have static. So, from the term itself, characters who are static do not change throughout the story. Kaya static, flat. So, hindi nababago yung kanilang characterization. Um, kung mabait siya simula una hanggang sa dulo, mabait siya. Kung masama siya mula una hanggang dulo, static character siya. So their use may be simply be to create or relieve tension, or they were not meant to change. So a major character can remain static through the whole story. So there's a possibility that the main character may retain his or her characterization. Then third, we have dynamic. From the term itself, the character changes his characterization. So, kumbaga, from good to bad, from bad to good. Okay? Ganon. So, they may learn a lesson, become bad, or change in complex ways. So, yung dating maldita, nagiging mabait. Yung dating mabait, biglang naging maldita at the end of the story. So, we call it dynamic character. Um, Another one is flat. So when we talk of flat, it has only a very limited characterization. A flat character has one or two main traits, usually only all positive or negative. So pwedeng two negative traits, one positive trait, or two positive traits. So they are the opposite of a round character. So when we talk of the round characters, this kind of characters has uh, a lot of characterizations. So marami siyang characterization. Ibig sabihin, marami siyang traits na rin-reflect. And then we have stock character. So stock character, ito yung mga stereotype character. Yung madalas natin nakikita na kapag genius, boy agad, boy genius. Kapag career person, ambitious. Kapag sidekick, laging faithful. Kapag scientist, laging mad. So, nagkakaroon nga ng stereotype of characters. So, kapag halimbawa ay ang character ay maid, lagi bang Bisaya na lang ang kanyang accent or lagi na lang siyang nakakatawa. So, stock character ang tawag natin. So, ito yung mga palasak ng characterization na paulit-ulit na lang natin nakikita, napapanood. So, stock character siya. So, this refers to stereotypical characters. Masungit na boss, ganun, something like that. Okay, so those are the stock characters. And then we have setting. Setting refers to the scenery or setting of a drama, which is seen on stage through its backdrop, furnishings, properties, and lightings. The setting establishes specific places and times. So, sa play, pag sinabi natin setting, we are referring to the stage design. So, yung nakikita natin mismo doon sa stage, yun yung kanyang tinatawag natin setting. So, it adds meaning to the scene. It helps us to understand further the scene or further the story. Okay? Nalalaman natin kung ano ba yung time ng isang lugar. So there are three major components to setting. We have the social environment, the place, and the time. So let's see kung ano ito. So halimbawa dito sa description. The living room of Mr. and Mrs. Pablo's elegant home. So the elegant home is the place. It is after midnight. So that is the time. So the social environment is the doorbell at main entrance, left upstage keeps on ringing. Heard footsteps from a right downstage. Someone switches on the light. Thea Sebia, a frail-looking woman in her late 50s, wrapped in a faded negligee, shuffles the door. So this is a social environment. So as you can see on this one paragraph alone, we observe the three settings: the place, the time, and the social environment. So why is it important? Why is it important? So it is important because it gives now the director or the actor's idea kung paano yung magiging treatment doon sa kwento. At para alam rin nila for the propsmen, para alam nila kung saan nila ilalagay yung kanilang mga props. For the stage designers, para makita rin nila kung ano ba magandang or appropriate na design para dito sa eksenang ito. Okay? So, there are two main types of settings. So, backdrop setting and integral setting. So, for the backdrop setting, it merges when it is not important for story and it could happen in any setting. So, backdrop lang siya. Wala naman siyang sense. Parang yung sa likod ko lang yan. Backdrop ko lang. Backdrop ko lang yan. Pero uh, wala naman talaga siyang sole purpose. Pero meron tayong tawag na integral setting. So, yung integral setting, ito yung talagang importante para ma-influence yung theme, character, and action of a story. So this type of setting controls the characters by confining a certain character to a particular setting. The writer defines the character. So dito talaga naglalagay ka ng mga specific na mga displays mo doon sa stage so that it will be now more realistic and assess na nasa stage ka. Naglalagay ka ng mga different props, different uh, production designs, so that could help in establishing the story. And point of view. So point of view is one of the basic elements of fiction pertaining to who tells the story. Although ngayon kasi hindi na masyadong ginagamit yung paggamit ng narrator sa kwento. Okay? So pasadahan lang natin. So meron tayong types of point of view in a play. So meron first person, third person, limited, omniscient, and the narrator as a character. So let's skip this part. Okay, diction and language. So diction and language is very important in every literary works because there is a need um, for the writers to use a more appropriate language and a more appropriate words in describing the scenes or even or more importantly in delivering the lines. Kasi yung kapag play talaga, usually maraming mga dialogues yan. Okay? Very limited lang yung mga scene description, mga ilan-ilan lang because nga it's more of dialogue because after all that is what makes it differ from other form of presentation performances. Okay? Through the use of dramatic language, the audience learns about character, situation, and conflicts. The dialogue reveals details about the characters and their roles in the story. The type of language used by character distinguishes his or her character. The use of accents, dialects, idioms, jargons, and other elements of language often distinguish one character from another. So it is for that reason that there's really a need uh, for the writer or for the playwright to really be particular of choosing the right language or choosing the right words in the dialogue of the characters. Language and dialogue delivered by the characters moves the plot and action along and provides exposition which defines distinct characters. Okay, so this time we have tone and atmosphere. Tone in drama signifies the moods and attitudes. Tone may be conveyed to the audience through the voice and gestures that accompany the dialogue. Tone may create an atmosphere of joy, fear, frustration, and others. So, sa pag-achieve ng tone, that again, that depends on the treatment there, that depends on the direction and the interpretation of the play. Symbolisms in allegory is also apparent. So makikita yan sa mga props, sa background design, sa mismong stage design. May makikita ka doon mga symbolisms and allegory. For example, mamaya pala examples natin. And mayroon tayong tinatawag na dramatic symbols. So this dramatic symbols such as characters, settings, object, action, situations, or statements, which may be universal or private. So we call it the dramatic symbols. Universal symbols are generally understood by the audience. Okay, so dramatic symbols, so kailangan mo pang unawain yung story kasi nga very distinct or very distinct lang yung symbolisms na yun doon lang sa play na yun. Pero kapag ginamitan natin ng universal symbols, it is kind of symbols wherein um, can be understood by many. So symbols referring to general human experience can be considered as allegory. So tawag natin is allegory. Examples of symbolisms and Tennessee Williams' play Streetcar Named Desire, which is one of my favorite plays. Okay? So, shadows and cries. Shadows kasi may mga shadows na makikita doon sa play ng Streetcar Named Desire, and cries. Madalas kasi umiyak dun si Blanche Dubois, pati yung kanyang kapatid. Okay, so as Blanche and Stanley begin to quarrel in scene 10, bars, all the shape and shadows begin to appear on the wall behind her. Discordant noises and jangled cries also occur as Blanche begins to descend into madness. All of these effects combine to dramatize Blanche's final breakdown and departure from reality in the face of Stanley's physical threat. When she loses her sanity in her final struggle against Stan Lee, Blanche retreats entirely into her own world, whereas she originally colors her perception of reality according to her wishes. At this point in the play, she ignores reality altogether. Okay, so but again, yung interpretation doon sa story ay dinagyan ng mga shadows that were in. Ang ibig sabihin daw nun ay yung Blanche final breakdown and departure from reality. Okay, it's only a paper moon. Ano ba to? In scene 7, Blanche sings this popular ballad while she beats. So, yung kinakantang It's Only a Paper Moon ni Blanche Dubois ay may meaning din sa kwento. The song's lyrics describe the way love turns the world into a phony fantasy. The speaker in the song says that if both lovers believe in their imagined reality, then it's no longer make-believe. These lyrics sum up Blanche's approach to life. She believes that her fibbing is only her means of enjoying a better way of life. It is therefore essentially harmless. And finally, we have theme. So this is what the play means as opposed to what happens. So sometimes theme is clearly stated in the title. So ano ba yung pinakang kwento ng isang kwento? Ano ba yung tinutukoy niya dyan? Ano ba yung gusto niyang i-reflect doon? So it may be stated through dialogue by character acting as the playwright's voice, or it may be the theme is less obvious and emerges only after some study or thought. The abstract issues and feelings that grow out of dramatic action. Theme can be about love, hope, revenge, um, pitfall, fall, okay, etc., etc. So those are the different themes which might be reflected. Again, that depends on the story. Okay, so you have filled in again your beings with Sir Bachelor and me, and thank you very much for listening. Okay, so those are the different elements of drama. So those are the things that you need to ponder on as you go through with analyzing or understanding a certain a drama. So kailangan matutunan yun that you will be particular of these elements so that you would know how you're going to interpret a particular um, script. Okay, so that would be all. So next meeting we'll be opening another lecture.